Шановні колеги, доброго дня.
Dear colleagues, good afternoon. We welcome everyone at the event of the Institute of World Policy, and today we are talking about foreign policy audit Ukraine-Russia. My name is Kateryna Zarembo, and I'm Deputy Director of the Institute of World Policy. Today's talk will be hard. The case of bilateral relations which are covered by our project. You know that in the scope very many strategic important partners are included, and even those partners who we would not like to have, but we have them. Today we will be talking about the country which is not only the neighbor, simple neighbor of Ukraine, the country which tries to be the center of force, the center of influence in the region and the world. Today our panelists are people who has very deep professional many years of experience in this field, and we have the honor to talk with them. I'm giving the floor to Olesya Yakhno. She has drafted an analytical report. Please tell us, Ms. Yakhno, how do you see the relations between Ukraine and Russia during the wartime and in post-war time? Good afternoon. I know many works of the Institute of World Policy, I mean audit of policy with other countries. When this proposal I received, I thought for a long time about the approach, how to articulate such an analytical report. On the one hand, we can analyze the whole set of existing problems. At the same time, how to write the policy brief. The countries are going to distance, Ukraine and Russia are going to distance themselves from each other. How to analyze the quantitative data which lies in the context of qualitative indicators and the trends which influence and will be influencing on the relations between Russia and Ukraine. So for myself, I tried to articulate the comprehensive approach to understanding why it happened this way, why Russia turned in its policy towards Ukraine 2 years ago, and how to focus the developments in Ukraine-Russia relations. First, I addressed the aspects, I divided the aspects into the regional and the world aspect. They will influence the CIS area and global scale processes. The Russian Federation has been using post-Soviet area for its regional leadership, but this regional leadership was very important for Ukraine as it claimed to become a leader in the world leader, and it wanted to return to 1991 year status quo when USSR was a regional leader. The events which we observe since 2014, this is not a response to the events in Ukraine. This is a response to the processes and events inside Russia. Russian Federation, starting with presidency of Vladimir Putin in the 2000s, Vladimir Putin He was a member of those structures of Western world at the same time in 2011 and 2012 when there were protests in Molotna Plosha and Sakharov Avenue. To responding to those events, there was a choice either to counteract the protests and rebuild the authoritarian regime or to support reforms. So Putin decided to restore the authoritarian regime, and the customs union was reinforced, so it was a turning point towards military logic when the influence could be achieved only by seeking for external enemy in the region and globally, such as NATO and the USA. It was quite understandable that the vectors of Ukraine and Russia, although processes are similar and we are economically are rather similar countries, but at the level of politics and vector of statehood, national identity, we move in different directions, and this difference will deepen further in future. And what happened during 2 years that the Russian Federation disrupted those close ties, economic ties, by the initiative of Russia, because Ukraine should replace its markets, Russian markets, with other marketplaces, because we can survive only if we diversify economic dependence on Russian goods on Russian markets. So post-Soviet world, which we knew in 1991, which Russia tried to retain it, to retain the status quo of 1991, and Russia somehow destroyed it itself. After that, other countries, not only Ukraine, are forced to seek economic alternatives and diversify economic ties after the FTA with EU was implemented. We can see that there is no customs union at the level of economic policy, but talking about the prospects, I think we have many cliches on the side of Russia, which undervalue the processes in Ukraine. And in Ukraine we have cliches that Russia will ruin itself sooner or later, or we should just make a fence between Russia and Ukraine. My opinion is we should study the risks concerning relations with Russia. This year we have the risk of aggressive Russia, and in several years we can have the risk of unpredicted Russia. Unpredictable Russia. We don't know what will happen in Russia internally, where it will be moving and how this movement will influence the neighboring countries. So we are in the stage of war with Russia, and we should make a list of requirements to Russia as our neighbor, which requirements on the side of Ukraine, we can formulate, we can articulate, because at the final stage, when we will discuss peace, because every war ends with peace. So starting with internal issues and ending with global issues, we should have requirements, have our vision, which relations with Russia in regional and global security aspect, what we want to see. So this is the basics of my research. My research concerns risks and our response to these risks. Thank you, Ms. Yakhno, for your outline of Ukraine-Russia relations for short-term and medium-term. Before giving the floor to our panelists, I have an administrative issue to help us with the second microphone. It doesn't work. I'm giving the floor to Mr. Volodymyr Ogryzko, a person who was the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine in 2007-2009, and now the head of the Center for Russian Studies. The question: what new mechanism of support on the part of the West can be established to counter the Russian aggression?
Thank you. Firstly, I would like to thank you for this invitation. I'm not here for the first time. I attended previous meetings, and I'm glad that your institute deals with such interesting topics, the development of relationship with our key partners. And the topic that was brought for discussion today is really acute, because Russian Federation poses real threat. And I'm glad that this is professional discussion. And when I got the invitation via internet, I thought that the Institute has some secret plan, because I learned that we will discuss, I cite, different aspects of cooperation between Russia and Ukraine and recommendations how to strengthen relationship between two countries. And I thought it's some sort of conspiracy. And then I understood that there is no such a plan, and we should speak about the situation in reality. We should clearly understand that we should first think how to stop aggression and then how to neutralize aggressor. Of course, we can say about different scenarios of our potential relationship, but honestly speaking, I believe that it's weird to speak about relationship between Ukraine and Russia, because we do not have political relationship now. If we call relationship the exchange of some claims and blames, maybe this is a relationship. If we call relationship some sporadic meetings at different levels, yes, maybe this is a relationship, but in my opinion, this is not normal relationship. In our political life, there is such a thought that we should find ways to improve the situation, but I believe that we should have clear position. And this clear position, in my personal opinion, is that we should break diplomatic ties with the aggressor state, and we should introduce visas with this aggressor, and we should come out of the Commonwealth of Independent States. And some people say that yesterday Razumkov Center published statistical data that the majority of Ukrainians are against breaking diplomatic ties and getting out of the Commonwealth of Independent State. And I make different conclusion. This is the estimate of our work, the work of the power, the work of civil activists and intellectual think tanks. So we didn't communicate properly to our society what really happens, and this is sad. I really glad that Olesya prepared this interesting analytical report, and I was really interested in this report, and I agree with many conclusions. I paid my attention also to your thought that we need to analyze Russia concerning the strategy of break and the strategy of isolationism, because Russia tries to find its way, and you said that the problems appeared in 2011-2012 after Bolotny Square protests. Then Russian power chose between the options, the catch-up strategy, try to catch the West, and the strategy of to break everything and return to Cold War. But you know, in our center, we try to look at these problems from historic prospect. And honestly, the situation is a little bit deeper. Some time ago, in 1980s, at one of the conferences, I met with the then young intellectual from Moscow who spoke English freely. He was pro-Western, and then he was transformed. He became the proxy of Dugin, and this is Sergei Karganov. And 2 months ago, he was interviewed by Spiegel, and he said serious things, and I cite. I believe it is important. We, Russia, want to have the status of the great state. We cannot get rid of it. In 300 years, this became our genetic code. We want to be the heart of Eurasia, and also subcontinent of Europe will belong to this spot also. So this problem appeared 300 years ago, and it didn't change. So maybe the ways are different in external policy, but the main part remains the same. For Russia, Europe is too small. Russia do not want to obey. They need broader spaces to dominate. Whether it is realistic, it's a different question. This is an illusion that will result to fatal consequences in the development of Russia. But now we see with a strategic view on the place of Russia in the world, and in this situation, can we have good relationship with such state? I believe not. So I would like to answer your question, Kateryna. What I believe should be our task in relationship with Russia, first, this is to get rid of illusions once and for all. Second, to understand that Russia won't change its policy towards Ukraine and the West. So this is their permanent position. And also, we should explain this to our Ukrainian citizens in order not to get such interesting statistical data I mentioned, and also to explain it to our partners in the West, because many people in the West, this is like opening America. Also, we should implement the strategy of counteraction of and in the West and here in Ukraine we do not have proper policy towards Russia. So we have some thoughts about the policy of Russia towards us, but there is no conceptual policy what we should do in relationship with the state. And also we should rise economically in order to have military might to counteract Russian aggression. And in this way we will become interesting to NATO, not just the state that want to enter NATO. We would be able to propose to the alliance something important, and the alliance doesn't have now strong eastern flank. That's why this can influence greatly on the relationship with Russia, but the key is the deterrence of aggressor to return the state in the sphere of law. Russia is a global threat, and I believe that Ukraine has a historic mission to unite civilized world to stop this threat. You remember this classic phrase, "I born, you then you know what is the continuation of this phrase." So thank you for your opinion and for your recommendations. I would like to give the floor to the next speaker, diplomat Kostyantyn Gryschenko, former Minister of Foreign Affairs and also the ambassador to former ambassador to Russia. Also, I would like to ask you your opinion. Do we need some informal, direct contacts with Russia? Can they be useful in such a situation? Thank you. Firstly, I would like to thank to my colleague for this brief and good presentation of opinions I mainly agree with. Of course, there can be different views on the genesis of the crisis in our relationship that turned into a terrible threat for the existence of Ukrainian state, and we should take these opinions into account. Everything, I believe, started before this. With Georgian and the Russian war, I was then ambassador of Ukraine in Russia, and I witnessed how fast and rigid they changed attitude not only to Georgia but also to Ukraine, because at that moment Ukrainian state helped Georgia in this conflict, and this was presented as some sort of break in our relationship. And then they started twice a week, they conducted meetings, demonstrations near the embassy. And what we see now in the news of on Russian television It happened then, and no matter who was ambassador and what messages and signals were given from the part of Ukraine, but this was the start of through the media, they created the opinion in the society that Ukraine and its power are hostile towards Russia, and respectively, in commas, Russia should react on this, respond. So we have an impression that you can turn on zombie TV channels, and if you look what is going on in the relationship with Turkey, this is a different situation. This was a short-term crisis, and we have this crisis for more than 10 years. I mean, modern period of time. So we should pay attention to several important facts and important moments, because our own interests depend on this. So you remind us of the survey conducted by Razumkov Center. No matter the policy of Ukrainian states towards Russia, this policy should be based on broad, maybe not consensus by society, but support of the majority. If there is no such support, no matter who the president is or the government is, they will be limited in their ability to lead this policy. After 2 years of armed conflict in the east of Ukraine, there are still a lot of, and the majority maybe of those who are for the diplomatic relationship and limitless trade. It shows that the situation is like this in reality, and sometimes the majority in Ukraine, they feel that with a neighbor like this, we can't choose our neighbors. People see that we cannot live constantly in the conflict, in the permanent conflict. It would be connected with the fact that the price, the huge price, will be paid for this. So they see that there will be limits for economic growth. Because in order to live in a forecast future in the conditions when investors, and all the investors without exception, do not like when the situation cannot be foreseen and the conflict may arise easily. So in the situation, we won't be able to attract investment in such case if there is no good prospects for the future. And the main task now for Ukraine is to find the formula to stop the military conflict, and political regulation should be implemented that take into account long-term progress, and that is impossible without interaction with Russia. This is the main issue. I understand completely how difficult to propose a formula that everyone would like, especially those who really deal with these issues and is concerned with the facts that Ukraine should really carry out its course in this situation. But it is really important to counteract the threat of our stability in order to move forward on the way of reforms and building democratic state. And I believe that we will be able to show our results in order to integrate in common European space in the European Union. And I believe that we should focus our efforts on this. We won't be able, fortunately or unfortunately, to separate from Russia, and not only economically, because there are millions of families who support the relationship with Russia, and maybe they won't support the decision of the government to establish some visa regime. And this also will influence the support of the power in the issues that are really important for the country, and maybe this decision won't be taken in the short perspective. Also, the second element is that all our Western partners, they provide different view. They say that you should communicate with Russia in order to overcome the crisis. Yes, we will help you. Yes, we will support your arguments, but at the end, today we see that those parameters that were laid down in Minsk, the document was not ideal, it wasn't balanced properly, but no matter what, our German and French counterparts, and they see that there is no alternative, and at the level of declaration, the power of Ukraine supports this. But how to transfer from declarations of the implementation of the from the development of the roadmap to its implementation? So this is the main challenge for us. But all the process of negotiations in the framework of the Minsk format, that may be secondary in its importance, and the main is in the contact of Normand group. They are separated from society and from experts. That's why it's difficult to say in what way and how efficiently the most important positions of Ukrainian states are supported, those that are declared openly. So we cannot see efficiency in this field. We see that the opinion of society and of political elites of the European countries, it shows that they want just to close this issue, to end the situation. And this is a great challenge. And in order to overcome it, we should have clear strategy. It not necessarily should be discussed in public sphere, but it should be well thought through and echeloned, and there should be included not only recommendations, but there should be really established goals that can be reached. And going back to your question, maybe all the contacts are useful if there is sense in them. Of course, we should negotiate, we should communicate with those who have broad ideas, who Karganov is an intellectual, but there are other opinions, there are people with broad view, but they are scarce in Russia. The only thing we shouldn't wait for is that that this discourse will influence today's approach that is dominant in Russian Federation. For this, we need contacts that will help us to influence on the elite of Russian leadership. And we need people who will be able to speak with them, and the people who have experience, who have good proposals and understanding not only their own interests, but also how to propose the scenario that defend the interests of Ukraine and can be seen by the other party, and this is a great challenge. So this is not only a process, it should be understanding that you shouldn't speak in Twitter about your negotiations. You should prove that you can bring results. And this is a great challenge because world changes and the instruments of diplomacy and international relationship, they're broadened, and at that we shouldn't forget that in the end someone takes final decisions. And from these decisions, the future of our relationship depends on. And this relates to Russia, this relates to Ukraine. And if they do not hear us in Washington, Paris, London, and Berlin, maybe we cannot count on that with all efforts of civil society and separate experts, we won't be able to change the situation. We need more rigid and comprehensive communication of the position of Ukraine. We need people who can articulate this position, and we should be heard abroad because Ukrainian people, maybe they understand the situation, but our foreign partners should be properly informed on the matters. Thank you.
In fact, your last sentences concern my question to Volodymyr Fedorin, our next speaker, former editor-in-chief of Forbes Ukraine magazine. In particular, we highly appreciate your contribution into Ukrainian life because you have the experience of living in Russian Federation, but you lived in Russia previously, and now you have been living in Ukraine for 5 years, if I know the right information. So I'm interested, who are those persons with whom Ukraine can talk in Russia? I am very glad to be here because I believe we need finally to take a proactive position, not to respond to Russian actions. We should try to become actors, authors, but not objects of policy. I have learned the policy brief and found there several very correct ideas. During last 2 years, I provided 2 very extensive interviews. The first was in 2015 in summer, when I formulated a controversial idea that Ukraine may think about adopting an act to support democracy in Russia in order to demonstrate that we have not only tanks but also soft power. The second, my attempt was more extensive. It is our book with Boris Loshkin as a co-author. The book is dedicated to Ukraine-Russia relationships, and we view these relations as a long-term opposition. Even in the event of democratization, we don't think that democracy in Ukraine may persist for a long time. So the dangerous role of Russia will remain in place, and we should mobilize the citizens of the neighboring country. They can mobilize under some aggressive flags and slogans. the key role, I suspect, in getting serious soft power in Ukraine against Russia. This is radical reform. This is the first. The second is enhancing defense capability of Ukraine. The main thing which Ukraine can do to build stable long-term relations with Russia. This is to build strong Ukrainian state. But we also should do many other things. It is very good that we discuss here how we should act in future. Russia and Ukraine had joint history, similar languages and similar culture, but in this situation it is hard to assess, to evaluate the other country, the other neighboring country, but I think that Ukraine, in fact, is the flagship of defense of extended West. This provides us some advantages in Russian studies domain. We can raise the question, the issue that Ukraine may become the leader in consolidation of researches into Russia, and for this, to this end, we need correct management of such projects for our partners to understand that Ukraine works not only in its narrow interest but for the West in general, and that it is ready to provide high quality research, high quality analytical data and materials and research. Analytical materials is good, but also development of policy towards Russia. I think that in this aspect Ukraine also should play more active role, otherwise the direction which Russia policy will take, we won't like it. The panelists talked much about pressure of Berlin on Ukraine that make peace faster. Just short remark, investment review was yesterday published where we are recommended to strengthen integration with the customs union. This is viewed so from the headquarters of OSCE. We understand that this is not the option at all. The next aspect, which is harder of the policy development, whether there is someone to talk to in Russia. A good example, in February at one Air of Freedom radio broadcast, I met one famous intellectual from Russia who might play a very strong role in that attack in 2014 ended with Minsk agreements, but not the conquering of Ukrainian Mariupol and other things. The discussion was not fruitful on that air broadcast. Anyway, we of course need to talk Also, we understand that the other side has absolutely different position from our position of the country which has been attacked by the neighboring country. Anyway, even if when we don't know how Moscow will act in future, we should still have some conversation with its politicians. The Russian culture in consolidated Russian Federation, it serves the ground to substantiate the vision of the world, but this is not the permanent view, the permanent vision. This is a thing similar to the vision which inspired the leadership of the Third Reich in Germany in 1930s. Germany now has eliminated all those visions which archaized the Germany in 1930s, making it an authoritarian state. So this decoding and recoding of Russian culture will play good role, and Ukraine can play a very good role if Ukraine will interpret this culture to Europeans in quite understandable language for Europeans. So I offer to explain Russian students the modern European view of Russian culture, Russian literature, if we want some time to reach peace with Russian Federation without reprogramming. This is impossible. I think we should look into this direction as well. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Volodymyr, for your thesis, which provide us some reasons for optimism. Now I'm glad to start the round of questions and answers. Please be brief. Andrei Meger, consulting firm Concur. Yesterday there was an interesting discussion on Ukraine-Russia relations in 2012. Besides Minsk agreements, how our experts and diplomats think what alternative ways we can offer, because Minsk agreements do not work. The Normandy 4 and Budapest memorandum, they also didn't work. What alternatives can be offered? This is the questions to all panelists. Thank you. You are right. Existing international legal instruments proved they are inefficient, but we should make correct conclusions from this inefficiency. The conclusions do not give us chance for optimism. When we hear one expert said that the Budapest memorandum didn't work, let's write new agreements. But where is the guarantee that they won't be violated by Russian Federation? As for me, this is absolutely true fact that any document signed by the Russian Federation doesn't worth paper on which it is written. So the more adequate response is to strengthen statehood of Ukraine and its defense capability. On this stage, we should save us by our own efforts. We are proposed Minsk agreements and other formats in order to stop discussing this topic fast on our account. I think that the key element is internal development, but anyway, we should understand that it is necessary to form anti-Putin coalition in the world to support Ukraine. This may sound rather rough, but this is the second component without which we can't realize our national interests. Of course, this is not easy task, and we hear from many European capitals and politicians this is beyond their logic of actions, but the naive ear of expectations of common happy future has ended. We should work to provide future for ourselves by ourselves, by our own efforts. Our armed forces should be strengthened and maximum possible isolation of Russia. This is also the step. This is the only language which Russia can be addressed with is the language of force, because they do not understand any other languages than the language of power, strength, and force. Russia had the opportunity to stop the conflict in Syria, but they continued this tragedy for 2 years and a half. More than 300,000 people died, and the USA said that we have become friends, we find some common grounds, so we should be ready to explain our Western partners that the Russian Federation do not understand any other language except the language of force. When the economy will go on to below zero, only then Russia will try to understand something. So there is no sense to act in other ways.
We are speaking not only about military aggression, but also economic and communication war. Previously they spoke about default, and Russia played with this issue. And when we are speaking about the agreements, they won't solve all the complex of the problems. They just play some function, local, regional thing. And they don't speak about Novorossiya now and the localization of these regions in the framework of separate parts of Lugansk and Donetsk Oblast. And the Minsk agreement supported this function, and also they disciplined the participants of the negotiation process. Of course, it doesn't lead to peace, but it gives some ground, some platform to discuss some regional issues. The matter is not formats. So the problem is not format. The problem is military logic and military policy adhered to by Russian Federation. And I agree that as many participants said, this is a long story. Vladimir Putin said that this is civil war, but this is civil war of Russia against Ukraine. If he thinks about it, not in the framework of separate people, but he believes that all the post-Soviet state is under the influence of Russia. So it means that this is civil war of Russia against Ukraine. And if we are speaking about the historic arguments, they believe that we are Westerners, such as Georgia and Moldova also, and the struggle is in this direction. And I believe that we can agree that only by uniting different instruments and different platforms, Minsk and Geneva potentially, and an economic pressure through sanctions and reforms inside Ukraine, and increasing our military might will have the effect. And in this way we can counteract Russia. And the matter is not only Budapest Memorandum, but also the Council of Security that was created after the Second World War in the UN, and it testified that Russia had strong positions as the side that won in the war, so that provided Russia good grounds. And now, I mean, Russia as one of the countries that use this myths in their policy and rhetoric, and they violate laws at the level of Budapest Memorandum, and also that the Council of Security that should counteract war. We see that there is a subject that continue aggressive policy, and here we see that, of course, we cannot say that Minsk agreements can solve the tasks of such big scale, but they function at the local level. Thank you. Konstantin Ivanovich, 2 words. You know, always there is difference between what we wish and what is right, and what is possible and painful. And between them and above this, and above this is, as they say, extreme threat and the need to counteract this threat. And there is no easy way out from the situation. There is no simple recipe to strengthen our military might and to influence on the development of democracy in Russia, to strengthen our economy, and to seriously influence the opinion of our main partners. So we should have resources for this. And as of now, we know that the economy is not in a good state, and it depends on the possibilities to get credit from International Monetary Fund, because no one else provides. And we speak now about stabilization of the economy and creating of preconditions to go to the next stage when it will be sustainable development. Without it, it is impossible to increase our military capabilities. Now the 5% of the budget goes to the military sphere, and for the country that has so many threats, it's little, but and I agree with the Prime Minister, we cannot allocate more. That's why when we say that we can increase our military might and improve economy, we should ask ourselves how. And we should create preconditions to get investment. And in order to get investors, we need to solve issues connected with the armed conflict. And thus, I don't have a recipe, but we should understand and see that there is no simple recipe to overcome the crisis that is not only reduced to the conflict in the East, but this is one of the main components, of course. Today, we should focus our efforts to stop military actions, to also implement Minsk agreements, to counteract threats, and also to propose formula to use it at some stage to reach results that will be legal and in accordance with the Constitution of Ukraine. And for this, we should be open for any format, no matter what format. And we should understand that there are not only positive sides of this. For the second time, if you paid attention to this at Yalta strategy conference, representative of France, close to Sarkozy, he says that Russia is everything for us. So if Sarkozy becomes a president, how can we convince? And if in Germany, and here I'm not so good specialist as Mr. Ogryzko, but if we take into account all the declarations from Steinmeier, we can expect not betterning of the situation and continuation of sanctions, but other things. Also, we should understand that the fate of presidential elections in the United States, we do not know what will be the situation there. We should have highly professional position. It shouldn't be based on populism inside the state, because beautiful slogans and that is convincing formulas for population. We have a lot of them, and many people support these slogans. But we should take into account all the threats, and we should build a strategy supported by real ideas as to technical steps, and we should also have resources, and we are lacking in this area. So the matter is not a format, but from other side, the problem is in real approaches and the opportunities, the ability to say no when you know, and you can convince people in any format, and you can deter the proposal of the closest friends, but you should have arguments for this, and they should see that you have clear position as a state, and that you have support of, at least support of political elite. I would like to add, so big bargain is not possible with Kremlin, even small bargain is not possible. So we cannot just stop this problem in Donbass. Maybe you can correct me, but we had some agreements to continue the lease of Sevastopol for the Black Sea Fleet, and you know that it all went wrong. So this is illusion. So no investment will go to Ukraine if we make peace with Putin, and the investment will come only if Ukraine will carry out deep reforms, and we do not see this happening. Political elites are not ready for reforms, But only deep, serious reforms will allow to have big resources that Ukraine really possess. These will be hard reforms, but this is the way. We depend on ourselves, not on some honest word of a man you cannot trust no matter what.
Мені здається,
Thank you. I saw two questions among the audience. Leonid Vashuk, Science Consulting and Communication. Tell us, please, what about the line which was adopted by the Verkhovna Rada that Russian State Duma is not legitimate in general? If State Duma is not legitimate and the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine would adopt such decisions, so what would be with the foreign policy? What would be the influence of this decision on the foreign policy of Ukraine? Other questions, please? Daria Gaidai, Institute of World Policy. I have comment on soft force. Panelists said that we should make contracts and invite good Russians. There is a trend to go to Ukraine is more of a tone. This is not only because of security, but Ukraine is has an image of so intellectually and economically obsolete country, so it is not prestigious. This is the comment to where universities try young Russians not to visit Ukraine, so that they do not know the situation in Ukraine is not so awful as they are told. Daria, from the work of our center, there were 3 Russian experts who visited us in November. We will have the event on internal situation in Russia, which is titled Stable Instability and Perspectives. The question is not in that some Russians do not want to visit us. Some Russians just are afraid to visit us. Some military experts who are famous, who were invited from Russia, they were told that when we get back to Russia after visiting Ukraine, they said we will be in jail for state treason, because they demonstrated us the guidelines where the speech on military development of Russia could be interpreted as treason. So, as concerns Russian students, how they agree to go to Ukraine, to visit Ukraine, and then to be in jail somewhere in the Far East, this is really the question. This is not the law. This is a declaration of the Verkhovna Rada. It doesn't have the power of resolution, but anyway, I agree with one thought which voiced out Mr. Tarasyuk, for ex-Minister of Foreign Affairs. This is the message to our internal audience in Ukraine, because no country in the world except Ukraine does not support the vision that State Duma is illegitimate, because this would prevent opportunity of external foreign relations between those countries and Russia. So this is limited opinion. Of course, this is important, and the Council of Europe will discuss this, I think, but we can't expect that someone except Ukraine, besides Ukraine, will support the opinion that State Duma of Russia is illegitimate. It doesn't work to think so. Not all steps should be understood by us in practical plane. This resolution, this is just demonstration of our stand for our internal audience, in primarily Crimean Tatars. This is our stand which we voice out and demonstrate to Crimean Tatars and to the world that we do not agree with the accession of Crimea. So we believe that this State Duma is illegitimate. This lays fundamentals. Russia's fundamental mistake, which was made in 2014, it resulted in the incorrect strategy at all. The issue of doubtfulness of Russian State Duma, this would be an informal opinion, but it can be discussed somewhere. Also, it is not realized in practice. So some criminal investigations, criminal proceedings against Sergei Shoigu, these steps we should initiate. They may have result in 2 or 3 years' time. Thank you. Your comment? Small comment. Based on international agreements, Crimea is not recognized as the territory of Russia, so any elections, including elections to the State Duma of Russia, can't be recognized. Even the law of Russian Federation says that parties cannot be nominated somewhere in one place nominated and in one place not nominated. So the votes in Crimea, in fact, if this voting is not recognized by international law, by international community, then the State Duma of Russia should not be recognized in general. Well, other questions, please. No questions. Mr. Gryschenko. This is not quite so. First, this is political signal to the society in the first tone. The second, no recognition of elections in this or that territory usually doesn't mean that the elections in general are illegitimate. In practical and legal terms, the USA, the UK, Australia, despite their joint alliance when they struggle against the USSR, they did not recognize accession of Baltic countries into the USSR, but this did not prevent them from hosting the delegations from the USSR in their countries. So international law doesn't work in this plane. This is political strategy, political approach of individual countries matter. So there is nothing to talk about here. Thank you. Well, maybe we are to finish our discussion today. I would like to thank every speaker. As for me, I was listening very attentively. I would like to thank our sponsors and partners from Ukraine Crisis Media Center as well, who provide us the opportunity to use their platform. Next discussions in the scope of foreign policy audit of Ukraine will be on October 5th, Ukraine, Georgia, and on October 12th, Ukraine, China. You are welcome to our events, and thank you to the panelists to your very specific recommendations and reflections. Thank you very much.